In today's video, I'll be covering shooting a traditional bow out of a tree saddle. To be honest, I don't really think it's that much different or more challenging than shooting a compound out of a saddle, but there are a lot of guys that seem to struggle with it. I get a lot of questions about it, and I think there's some common things that people will tend to do that really reduces their ability to get into effective shot positions. So I'll cover that as well. As far as the equipment's concerned, I'm really not using anything special. This is roughly the same exact gear that I'd be using if I was hunting with a compound. I've got the Tethrd Lockdown saddle. This one happens to have these big side pouches, which you would think might hinder string clearance, but I don't seem to have too much of an issue with it. I'm using a standard size Predator platform today, although you could use an XL if that's your preference. On this particular tree, I'm able to use the top of one of my climbing sticks as an additional footrest around the tree. And then I also have two strap-on steps on the back side of the tree that I don't always use, but in some cases they're really helpful, so I'll run over those scenarios as well. And then for actually holding the bow, I have a HIT strap. This is a homemade one that's a little bit smaller, but I'm able to just hang my bow right onto that HIT strap. And then I also have my quiver hanging from that strap as well, although if you have a bow mounted quiver, then what you could do is create a little hook within the quiver out of a piece of Kydex or something similar, and then you could use that to hang your whole bow. As far as knee protection, you can use whatever you want. You can use pads that go on your knees. Today I happen to have a pad that I have strapped onto the tree. As far as the setup itself goes, I do like to run a fairly low tether height. I think that helps with comfort for me, and it also helps with some of the weak side shots that I would take. And then I do have my bridge set fairly short. Now this bridge has an adjustable prusik, and so I have it adjusted to where that'll actually stop and prevent me from over rotating. So now I'll jump right into what I think is one of the biggest issues that I think people have. And you'll see this across the board. I work a lot of shows in the spring, and you'll see people that come and have never hunted out of a saddle before. And it seems like over half the time, their first instinct when they get up onto a platform and start hanging from the tree is they'll lean way back like this. They'll pick up the little practice bow and they'll try and draw back like this and just be in a horrible angle where their arm is basically like down next to their torso. And we're all taught to have that good T form and try and maintain that when you're shooting out of an elevated position. This is no different. So you have to really learn to be able to trust and use your saddle to your advantage. What I mean by that is if I start in this position and then I just keep that torso moving forward, and then I exaggerate that position also by kind of pushing my hips back into the saddle, then I can really get into an extreme position there, even beyond what would be necessary. So what I like to do as a nice, stable, all-around shot position is I kind of like to drop a knee into the tree, keep my feet nice and close to the trunk, and then I'll just go ahead and lean forward and stick those hips back into the saddle. And come back to full draw in that position. It allows me to maintain a good upper body posture that I would have if I was shooting on the ground. Now, we talk about strong side and weak side shots a lot, and generally speaking, strong side setups are always going to be your best. If you're looking for a tree, you want to be able to set up so that you can take a strong side shot based on your expected deer movement, because if you happen to get caught off guard, a strong side shot is the least required amount of movement to be able to pick your bow up, draw back, and shoot. If I have a deer that catches me off guard coming right in here, all I have to do is just lean forward a little bit, pick that bow up off the hanger, not move my body really much at all, come back to full draw, good posture, and shoot. And it really doesn't require much movement. Now, you can get into a bunch of different shooting positions that I'll show, but the nice thing about the strong side shot, of course, is it requires the least amount of movement. Now, some trees are not going to allow you to set up to where you have a strong side shot, and there's also going to be scenarios where a deer doesn't come in where you expect them to. For shooting anything basically from almost directly in front of you to directly behind you, all we're doing is we're taking a strong side shot and just allowing ourselves to move around the tree this way. And this tree that I'm in right now kind of has this really goofy double banana shape. It's kind of bent sideways and then it kind of hooks this way. So you can tell, like right now, I'm utilizing one of those steps in the backside of the tree to help give me a counterbalance. But then if I wanted to shoot directly at my 6 o'clock and a steep downward angle, I'm gonna go ahead and keep these feet close to the trunk, drop this knee into the tree, and then again, lean into that saddle to wherever I need to get to maintain that good upper body posture. And go ahead and take that shot. Those steep downward shots, for me, when I hunted out of a stand, those were always the hardest ones to use. I used to hunt with a 68-inch bow that I had made. And whenever I'd try and stand on that tree stand platform and get those downward angles, my string was always contacting my thigh, and it was just, I had to really cant the bow, and it was a tough position to get into. But with the ability to really lean into that saddle, that doesn't become as much of a concern anymore. So now let's talk about shots where you have to go around to kind of the front side of the tree, like 12 o'clock or even a little bit past 12 o'clock. Now, if you're hunting out of a small tree or a really straight tree, you can probably do this with just a platform and nothing else. You can see how on this tree, I was able to climb up the strong side and be able to put my climbing stick, the last one, level of my platform on my strong side, which gives me another foothold to be able to leverage off of. And then also on this tree, I have that step on the backside that again, gives me something to leverage off of. If this tree has a little bit of forward lean to it, if I don't have something on the backside to be able to leverage off of, then it's easy to kind of overswing and it can be hard to control. But with this instance, having this step here at my 12 o'clock position roughly, I can push off of that, and that prevents me from going too far, and it also gives me a nice stable shooting position. You just got to use your best judgment, look and see what movement you can get away with and when. Keep the trunk between you and the deer as much as possible, and then I'll just take my eyes and kind of go back and forth between the step and the deer, make sure I'm there, and then slowly move to get into that position. Now, once you're in this position, whether or not you were able to just push off the platform or if you had something on the back side of the tree, the process is the same. I'm keeping my feet close to the trunk. I'm dropping a knee into the tree. I am pushing my hips backward in the saddle to get my torso in a good position. And then I'm able to come back to full draw at 12 o'clock or even past. And I'm able to take that shot. Now, one of the ways you can take a weak side shot, which I'll get into, is to continue that motion all the way around the tree. It can be a good way to do it. One thing you'll have to be aware of is you'll need to let a little bit more line out of your tether, especially if you're on a bigger tree. And then in this instance, my pack is kind of in the way, so that's something you need to be aware of. And also, you might run into a lot of scenarios in which, because of branches, you might not be able to go all the way around the tree like this. So you have to take other methods of doing a weak side shot. But this can be a good option to be able to do it if you have the type of tree that can support that movement and you have steps going around the backside. I'd say that for me, maybe 60–70% of the time, those additional steps that I have on a strap will just stay right in my saddle. I'll never bring them out because I don't need them. But there are those occasional trees, like this one that's just got a wonky lean, where if I want to be able to come around to this direction, I need to be able to leverage off of something on the downward side of the tree. Or if you got a forward leaner, to be able to put those steps up higher than your platform on the back side. Or if I was on a tree that leaned the other way and I had to climb up the weak side of the tree, I wouldn't otherwise have a step there, but I would want one. So there are instances in where I'll choose to use those steps, even though in a lot of cases I really don't need them. So now we've covered basically 6 o'clock all the way to past 12 o'clock. Let's talk about that dreaded weak side shot that everybody seems to despise. There's a lot of different ways to be able to do the weak side shot. There are really, I guess, two that I like, and there's a couple that I don't. One is the method I showed before, where you're able to get around the backside of the tree. In scenarios where that works, it can be a really good option. The one that I do more often than not, because a lot of times I'm hunting trees that have a lot of cover in them, that's why I'm choosing to sit where I sit, and I just can't go around the backside of the tree, let alone get a bow this long drawn back. So what I'll typically do with this low tether height that I like to have is I'll just take that bow, I'll have my finger on the arrow against the shelf holding it in place, and I'll just slowly tip this bow over top of my bridge. And then once that lower limb clears the tree, and I can just allow it to drop. And now I got my bow on the correct side of the tree. And the nice thing about that movement is you're able to keep your eye on the deer the entire time, and you're able to know when you have to pause and when you can move and pause and move to be able to pull that maneuver off. If you have good torso flexibility, you very well might be able to go ahead and just kind of twist your hips and get back to full draw and shoot a weak side shot like that. In fact, Carl Kossuth on his opening day buck basically did that exact same movement. He didn't even move his feet on his platform. He just picked his bow up over his bridge and took a shot at like sub 10 yards, one stick off the ground, and killed his buck that way. So it can definitely be done. If you have a little bit less mobility, then you might have to pivot your feet a little bit, just like this. Then that allows you to open your hips up more, which allows you to open your chest up more. And now that allows you to take that shot. And again, if you're having clearance issues here, it's probably because you're not pushing your hips back far enough. If you're ever in this kind of a scenario where you're like leaning back, it's really not going to allow you to get into an optimal shooting position. And again, one of the reasons why the weak side shot tends to be so challenging for people is because they might run into a scenario in which they got caught off guard, the deer showed up on their weak side and they're not ready. If you've got time to prepare, then it's really easy. All you have to do is do that same thing that I just showed you. And you can actually pull yourself up onto the platform and stand on it like it's a little mini tree stand. If you hear a deer crunching in the leaves and he's coming that direction, you got plenty of time to go ahead and get in this position and get ready. I like going over the tether as opposed to under the tether. Reason number one, for me to have the tether high enough to where I can go underneath it and kind of lock my shoulder in. It's probably not going to be as comfortable. And number two, this gives me way more freedom of movement and mobility to be able to get into a good shooting position. If I'm standing like this, it's basically just like a tree stand shot that you're able to pull off pretty easily. However, if you choose to go underneath your tether and bridge and pull the tether up over your shoulder like this, then it's kind of nice in that it holds you against the tree, but it really doesn't give you a great platform to maintain a good shooting position. I can't lean forward much here at all. And yeah, I can let a little bit of line out and make that easier, but even with a compound, I don't like doing that. I much prefer, personally, keeping that tether a little bit lower where it's more comfortable and just going over the top. I've shot a number of deer that way, even going back to, before 2010 when I was still using a Lone Wolf Assassin with that little waist-high tether that it had built in. I was always going over the top of that to be able to shoot weak side shots, and it just carried over pretty seamlessly into shooting out of a saddle. So I dropped that tether back down to where I normally like to have it, in a little more comfortable position. And I'll show the other way in which I don't always like to do a weak side shot, which is to basically drop a knee into the tree and roll and kind of open up and take a strong side shot and make it more open. Number one, because in a tree like this, if I do that, I'm just going to swing uncontrolled, which is one of the reasons why I have the step on the backside for this particular tree. But even if I go ahead and utilize that step and I roll around to this direction, it just generally seems like that's a lot of movement to be able to get away with when you're on the same side of the tree as the deer, and you have to, at a certain point, turn your head around and take your eyes off the animal. Whereas a lot of those other weak side shot maneuvers, I'm able to keep my eyes on the deer and be able to use my judgment to tell when I can get away with movement. The other reason I don't use this almost hardly at all is because when I film, my camera arm setup is like right here, so it just really wouldn't work for that. And again, if at all possible, if you think you might have a shot opportunity on that side, be a little bit more vigilant so that you can get over to make that shot happen to where you're not caught off guard, you have time to prepare and you have time to move and get into a good strong position. Most of the time when weak side shots go bad, it's because you're not prepared. All right, so we've covered basically the entire strong side from 12 to 6. We talked about shooting past the 12 o'clock position. We talked about shooting on the weak side, which includes basically all the way back to 6 o'clock on that end. So now I'll kind of go ahead and summarize. For me, and this goes for compound or traditional, I usually like to spend most of my time just kneeling against the tree like this. It's a little bit lower profile. I'm able to just move my head, not make big motions, and I like to try and set up, if at all possible, for strong side shots, just like you would ground hunting or out of a tree stand or whatever, because it's the least amount of movement. So that if I do have a deer that comes in, all I have to do is just slowly lean forward, pick up the bow off the hanger. I can keep my feet right where they're at. I can keep the knees against the trunk, and then I can push my hips back against the saddle, get my torso into a good position, come back to full draw, and you can see I have clearance here. I have clearance with the saddle, clearance with my bridge, clearance with my hips. And pull off the shot. I would probably venture to guess that for guys who've had issues, the most likely cause is not pushing your hips back in conjunction with moving your torso forward to maintain that good T position. Anybody who might be having issues with contact against your bridge or against your saddle or against your thigh, that might be the issue. This is a pretty long bow. I think it's 66, 67 inches, somewhere right around there. My other bow that I hunted with earlier this year is a 64-inch long bow. I'm about 6 foot tall. So maybe if you're 5'6" and shooting a 68, 70-inch bow, you have a little bit more of a string angle to deal with. But I would say for the vast majority of people, it shouldn't be an issue. And if you have clearance issues, that's likely the root cause. So I try to cover a lot of the most common scenarios. I might have missed some stuff. If you guys do have any additional questions, please drop them in the comment section down below. And thanks for watching.